mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the show. My guest today is Dr. Jennifer Brown, author of the book, When the Baby Is Not Okay, Hopes and Genes. First and foremost, she is a storied geneticist, public health advocate, whose credentials far exceed any possible words I could put together here in the intro. She's worked with Nobel laureates, has pioneered groundbreaking research in cancer, and really has some incredible hot takes on eugenics and the abysmal failure of healthcare communications for women, mothers, and people without privilege. She is also the mother of 2 daughters with a rare condition called PKU, and we're going to get into that as well, because that's another incredible story of heroism and advocacy. So without further ado, Dr. Jennifer Brown, I'm Matthew Zachary, and this is Out of Patience. So my favorite question to ask people on the show who have doctor in their name are, can you save someone on an airplane?
No, I cannot, unless it's like a panic attack or anxiety. I could talk them down, but not because I'm a doctor, because I'm a mom. So no, I'm not that kind of doctor. I have what's called a PhD in genetics, meaning I studied research for a long time, wrote up a long thesis, and got a degree. So it's more research science rather than medical practice. So nothing I say is like something that you should interpret as someone who's in medical practice. I'm not, never have been.
Yeah, not that kind of doctor. Should be a podcast. I've had lots of doctors on the show, and like, yeah, I did save someone in the airplane. Damn it! Like, okay, great, but I'm not a psychologist or I'm not a geneticist.
Right. And so for my book, I put that in the disclaimer that I'm not that kind of a doctor. I'm not a healthcare provider or a professional in any way. I was a researcher and then in medical education. So I've written for doctors to help educate them, but I myself am not a provider of medical care.
That's fine. I forgive you. You can stay. Don't worry.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome to stay.
I was like, oops, I failed the first question.
You have to leave now. My first introduction to the word genetics was through my uncle, or my godfather, my dad's best friend. His name is Jay Tishfield. And Jay was like one of the country's pioneering geneticists in the 70s and 80s. 90,000 PhDs, not saving someone on an airplane PhDs, but 90,000 PhDs from Yale. And he started doing all sorts of incredible, like Dexter's Lab meets Rick and Morty kind of stuff with early chemotherapies at Bloomington, Indiana. And like, oh, so that's what this is. But it was just the start. I wanted to just kick this off with like, tell me about on a positive note, the insane progress that we've made. My listeners love history. We have so many things to celebrate today that were like just faint ideas back then.
Yes, it's genetics has had a remarkable trajectory, and I think even the idea of DNA wasn't really around until the 60s when Watson and Crick and Franklin sort of discovered its structure and people started to understand its function. But I have to caution also that today, while we know a lot about the structure of DNA, we don't know a lot about the function of genes. So it's kind of a situation where we've been reductive and we've learned a lot about the bits and pieces of genes and genetics from the 1960s to today, to the point where we have sequenced the entire human genome. So we know the letters, say, as in letters of an alphabet of our whole DNA that's inside of us. But we really don't know how a lot of it works. So there's still a lot of unknowns. And I think that's a nuance that's lost on many of us when we go in for like genetic testing or something, we may think, oh, well, they know all about that. And sometimes they know a little bit about it, but often not a lot. So it's like sort of a caution that, yes, we know about genetics. Now we know where genes are on our chromosomes and which enzymes they encode and which genes are related to possibly having a disease. But we don't know a lot about how our genes function within our body and how that's affected by our environment or our choices in life or what medications we take, et cetera. So I think that it's an area of progress that's still really exploding, with a lot of interest in how those genes function and how that can help us in the future.
Behind one door is three more kind of thing? Yeah.
Yes.
I just remember how excited consumers were when genetics became home test kits, but they weren't threatening in the sense, Do I have cancer? No. Are you allergic to coffee? What was it like to be on the research side to see a consumer embracing this notion of spitting, on a swab or whatever, sending it off and finding out you have X?
Well, it was kind of scary to me personally because when that all started to become possible was around the time when I was having my first child who had a genetic disease or disorder that she'd inherited. And I was designing some of those tests. So the little DNA pieces that you probe in a test to find out if the person has that condition in their blood or not. And at the time, I knew that these types of tests give us some information, but not full information, and that some people would be at home taking these tests and get the results and possibly think they were definitive, something very real in black and white, like, oh, I might get Huntington's when I'm older, and now I'm, maybe going to feel depressed or anxious. So some of that kind of thing did happen where the genetic home testing, it gives information, but it's more like information about probabilities of things that may happen. And it's not very often a very definite yes or no about any particular issue, except, some basic ones. So I think that for me, being enmeshed in it, I really felt a sense of caution and a real kind of a desire that people would be able to know more about the tests than just the results they might be given by mail or by phone or by a printout, or maybe not by a person who really understood what the implications of that test were, which is still true today, that, when you get your prenatal screening or your testing for your baby on your newborn screening or your relatives do, they may be getting a result without getting a full context. So I think it was exciting in some sense that genetics finally had a role instead of just the esoteric kind of a study that it had been. Now it was a real thing in society that we needed to know what genes and DNA were.
Yeah, I worked in the advertising industry before I started Stupid Cancer in 2007. So I'm absolutely, I totally geek out over consumer behavior. And when Ancestry.com was the number one Christmas gift in 2019, there's mass consumer adoption on, am I really Belgian? Right? Has that helped or hindered I won't say the more legitimate, maybe the deeper parts of how genetics can really help? It's nice to know you're not Nigerian or you're Swedish, but do you want to know about these things? Then you became your own customer with your daughter.
Yes, that's a very important question, Matthew, is do you want to know? And it is a question to ask yourself. And I always say, there are some questions I don't want to ask. Like I never asked somebody, was I the best you ever had? These types of questions should not be asked because you don't really want to know the answer. And there are some questions like that in genetics too. Like for some people, after they get their results back from Ancestry.com, they're like, oh, wow, I really thought I was this, that, or the other, and I'm not. And so it can kind of reframe their self-image or their family's concept of who they are if they hold certain loves or biases based on their ancestry. And while I have to admit, I took the Ancestry.com test. And I was very shocked to find out about my background because it differed from tales I'd heard in childhood. And at the same time...
That's a separate podcast.
Yeah, right. And at the same time, though, I did not ask for the health-related information. So now that these companies that offered that testing are being bought up by others, and we don't know what the privacy will be or the ownership of that DNA that we contributed, I'm really glad I didn't get the health information, but that doesn't mean they don't have it. So if I contributed my DNA, they have that information. Will they use it? I don't know. But that's a whole new thing that came into it kind of after the boom. So it wasn't until after a lot of us had already took the test that we started to think, oh, wow, now Blackwell or somebody else owns this. What does that mean for me,
Well, we can get into the whole myriad genetics and all the crazy DNA ownership and IP. Maybe that's a podcast with bourbon. But that is also part of is AI going to kill us and who owns your genetics and whether they are your destiny or not. But let's perseverate more on the do I really want to know? And a good example is I consult for I won't name them, but a diagnostics company that has some kind of esophageal DNA thing that you get during like an endoscopy or during like some kind of bariatric type of thing. And it's a predictor of precancer, which is not a word most people are aware exists at this point now. So there's a difference between knowing if you're at risk for cancer versus at risk for precancer. But how does that factor into the rare disease world?
In the rare disease world, this is very central to how you understand your condition. So there's thousands of different rare diseases. And if you have one particular rare disease, what that may mean is that you have one particular gene that's somewhat different. And in my family, it's phenylketonuria, PKU.
Oh, that's the NutraSweet thing, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't have
I just
aspartame.
remember reading the word on the Diet Coke bottles.
Exactly. And that's the only place some people have ever seen it. It's a single gene change, but at that one gene, there are thousands of variants. So there's thousands of different kinds of different genes you could have there. So it's one gene, but it comes in many, many varieties, and each variety is slightly different. So a person being told from a genetic test that they have this condition, they have, say, PKU or a rare disease, what they don't know is which of those differences they have. It could be any one of 1,000 different things that's wrong with or different about that particular gene. So you don't know, will it be a case where you have some symptoms that are typical, or all the symptoms that are typical, or none of the symptoms that are typical. So there's a huge variability in how the health condition presents in the person in real life. So I think this is important to know, because if you're told you have this condition, then you set a frame around it for yourself. This is the frame I see myself within. And, you might actually have no symptoms at all, but you've already placed yourself inside that frame where you think, oh, I have a rare disease. So it's, again, a caution that a lot of this is very individual and dependent on how we live our lives and whether we have access to healthcare,
So of all the artificial sweeteners that the industry could have chosen to replace saccharin, they picked aspartame. Is that the chemical word for NutraSweet?
It is. And it's
the one that affects PKU.
Yeah, funny story. One of my daughters was on the bus blowing bubbles with Bubblicious, one of the really big pink bubble gums, and her sister got on the bus and saw her, and she freaked out because it had aspartame. And the younger one didn't realize or forgot or whatever, kind of like a direct poison. So, it's that sweetener is made up of aspartame, one amino acid, and phenylalanine, another, joined together. And so it's like a direct poison to people who can't metabolize or digest phenylalanine, one of the amino acids. So for people with PKU, having aspartame gives them a headache, and if they had it every day, it'd make them feel really sick and sleepy, or could cause, frank disease. So it's kind of weird that was put into so many things, and candies. And,
yes, everything.
So it's like you got to read all the ingredients, but more than that, sometimes it's in there and it's not on the list. So you have to be super careful about what you eat. I
as a layperson who doesn't have this, vividly recall, warning may not be good for people with phenylketonuria or whatever. Like, what the hell is that?
Right.
So you got publicity from the sweeteners.
Yes.
So let's talk about your daughter. How does one diagnose this at such a young age?
The rare diseases or rare health conditions that we know of are diagnosed usually after a newborn screening test. So it's a heel prick every newborn gets in the United States. And they take a little drop of blood and they screen it for all various functions of genes. So they're looking for enzymes and amino acids in the blood that are functioning in what they consider a normal range. And if that blood test shows something different, it could be that relates to one of the rare diseases. However, 9 times out of 10, that blood spot screening is a false positive, meaning wrong. It's just not accurate. So we all get that newborn screening as newborns since the 1960s. However, you need a second test. So they call you back to the hospital for a second test to actually diagnose any of the rare conditions. There's more refined tests for all the rare diseases that will show if that was a real signal, a real red flag, or if it was maybe a false positive and you were just fine. So the second test is more specific, and then you have a diagnosis. So for my first daughter, she was 9 days old, and my second daughter, 21 days old, when they got their actual diagnosis that they did.
Wait, were you expecting it with the second one?
Yes. Okay. I was expecting it, but it's kind of a funny story because the physicians were not. I was at Bellevue, one of the really huge New York City hospitals, and known for various things. Depending on how old you are, you might be afraid of Bellevue. I was.
Well, yeah, the little mental institution.
Yeah. And, criminals have been sent there, and all kinds of crazy things happen at Bellevue, but some good things happen too. Well, when I was there at Bellevue, it was my second daughter's diagnosis, and I was sitting there with their father was there at the time, and my toddler was there, and my newborn. And when the results came in, the senior doctor who was standing there, very respected figure, tall, middle-aged guy, very imposing. When he heard the results, he said, "What's wrong with you people?
What?
Tie the tubes. How many kids are you going to have?"
That's tone deaf.
It's eugenics, plain and simple. So I sat there and I thought, what a jerk. And everybody got real quiet. And then I looked over at their father and I said, "Oh, we thought about 5 more kids." So I was doing a little dark humor, and everybody didn't know what to say because, usually nobody says anything back.
That's just terrible.
It's terrible. And, to me, especially weird because I was already managing one child who had the rare condition, PKU, just fine. We were doing great. She was like a model patient. Her levels in her blood checked regularly were always fine, and she was quite smart and capable and all, so she seemed just fine. So if she had a sibling who had the same condition, in my mind, that was actually good because
Precedented.
Yeah, they support one another morally or socially or whatever. In any circumstance, there'd be someone around just like them. And also made it easier for me in the household for cooking. I was already a vegan, and they had to have a no-meat diet because of their condition. So it was kind of easy. Instead of having to cook separately in a different way for my new child, I was like, oh, part of the family. I know how to do this. I'm good. But the reaction in the medical profession was a clear bias against the birth of a child who may later become disabled. And that bias was something I really had not previously appreciated. I hadn't really run into it, and I wasn't even really aware of the role of eugenics in medical training. But I became aware, over the years because I heard things like that several times.
Well, Bellevue will not be a sponsor of this show.
Bellevue is probably not. If they listen to it, they'll be mad at me. But what can I say? It happened to me. Different people have different experiences.
Come on, that's just apathetic, toxic, masculine doctor bullshit. That's terrible.
And it was done quite theatrically and quite loud. So I must say that it was quite the show. So it was meant to intimidate, and it was meant to push someone toward the idea of sterilization, which I find, horribly offensive.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I don't know how to react to that.
Yeah, it was really awful. Yeah, so that was the diagnosis the second time around. It should have been something okay, because now I knew what was what. I wasn't going to spiral into depression or anything this time. But look what I ran into. The healthcare system itself was kind of the problem at that moment rather than my reaction or my genes being the problem.
Well, let's take a quick break. I want to talk to you more about the term rare disease with all of its glorious stigma. So we'll be back right after this. So I worked with NORD, the National Organization of Rare Disorders, for about 2.5 years. A couple of years ago, I met their board, Peter Saltonstall, worked very closely with their leadership on the RDAC meetings and some of the stuff with Eurordis across the pond. And I hosted their podcast basically, and I got to meet so many people from their community, mom and pops, ultra rare, hyper ultra rare. And my agency hat kept kicking in oh God, are we just in semantic land? Is it being just disabused as narrative kindling? What are your thoughts on, I also button that up. Rare is under 200,000. In my head, that's not rare. Rare is 4. Right? So as put your genetics, your mom hat on, your research hat on, how do you square all this?
I think categorizing things as a rare disease is a way to take the focus and the lens away from the person and personhood. So instead of a person with a special diet, it's a phenylketonuria. It's a PKUer. It's a PKU patient. What these are human beings, people who have full lives, and this is one small part of their life that relates to their diet in the case of PKU. And a number of the conditions are like that, where it is a dietary change. So I do think that calling them rare disease and making it a thing in a way takes away from the individuality and humanness of our lived experiences. So they band together, though, because there's something in common, which is that it's really hard to get your medication. So if there's less than 1 in 200,000 that has something in a population, then maybe your manufacturing company doesn't really want to make that drug because there really aren't very many people to buy it. And so they come together as sort of a group to advocate for healthcare for all is more what it's about. It's more about inclusivity of all of us with all of our variations so that we all get access to healthcare. And they pull them under an umbrella and sometimes refer to them as zebra or something like that.
Horse, was it? When you hear hoofbeats, don't assume it's a horse because it could be a zebra.
Exactly.
There you go.
Yes. And I believe that it's access to care that is what we have in common in what they call the rare disease community. But I have to say as a person that for me, to say rare disease community, well, like if I'm going to talk to people about that and use those words, they're going to automatically think it doesn't apply to them. Mm-hmm. Right off the bat, rare, oh, that's not me. But actually, for PKU, the rare condition that's in my family, it's 1 in 10,000 to 25,000 births. So that newborn will have PKU. But you got to get the recessive gene from both your parents. So the number of carriers, people like me who carry a gene for PKU that might show up in their child is 1 in 50. Now, does that sound rare?
No.
So why don't we know about this? So that's the thing I ask myself is like, how come we aren't learning, even in primary school or just in general in society, that each of us carry and are carriers for lots of different, quote, rare diseases. We are carriers for genes that have variants that could, with our partner when we have a child, turn out to give some kind of different health condition to our child. That's just part of human biology. That's just who we are. We all have rare genes within us that are not all that rare. So I think if you think about it that way, it's more that we just don't know that we're carriers until it happens to one of our children. And then we think it's rare and we sideline it and it's hard to get our health care. But maybe what we need really is a focus on inclusivity and access for everybody.
Well, just the word dis-ease. That I did a show a couple of years ago, and we just basically deconstructed the word dis-ease, disorder. And I always felt it was like a disservice to have a blanket term for these things, because technically being a lefty is a rare disease. Disorder, it's not. It's something you can live with. But to what extent can you start to then make it not a contest of who's suffering more that deserves what? And I'm saying this because it was kind of my very visceral reaction initially meeting this orphan disease, rare disease, ultra rare disease communities, where it reminded me of breast cancer in the early 2000s. Oh, you only had stage 2? I had stage 37. What's your take on that?
Well, you got the great big eye roll when you said dis-ease, because that is a pet peeve of mine. And throughout my 2 daughters' whole childhood, I never referred to their condition as a disease. Never, not once. And their clinic was called Metabolic Clinic because it related to how they metabolized proteins. And then one day they sent home a survey from the clinic for my daughters when they were teenagers. And it had questions in the survey about how they felt having a chronic disease and how they felt about their chronic disease. And my older daughter became really irate. She was outraged. She said, I don't have a disease PKU is a health condition. It's my condition. I'm not sick.
Right.
And what does chronic mean? And we lived in the Bronx, and chronic meant weed or drugs or whatever.
Right.
Right. So she's
Chronic
like,
and
what,
blunt, yeah.
What is this? They're asking me about my chronic disease. I'm fine. What's wrong with them? And she was mad. And so I went back and I mentioned to the doctor, well, hey, they don't like it when you call it a chronic disease, because they're fine when they have their medical diet or they eat the foods that are good for them. They have no symptoms. So is it a disease? It's just them. That's how they're living and they're healthy. So why are we calling it this? It's just so pejorative. And he said, oh, they don't have to like it.
Oh, God.
They have to.
Another one of these guys.
They have to accept it. And I was like, oh, do they? And I was quiet because, I didn't used to speak out much about what was going on. I would just sit there and be judging them and quiet, but I've gotten older and now I speak out about things like this. But I do think that calling things a disorder and a disease is a disservice. You are absolutely right. And that what we really mean is we want people from newborns, that's why we have newborn screening, to live their best possible individual health. It's health screening. It's not rare disease screening. It's health screening. We're screening to see about their health. And then if there's an aspect about their health we can improve on through diet or medications, we do this and we improve their health. So I think the focus on disease relates on the desire to medicate or cure it through something one can buy, and that it's largely commercial. That's my kind of view of it.
So you tick a box that I've never had a guest tick a box for, which is I'm now 1 degree away from a Nobel laureate. Because I read that you were trained by Nobel laureate Barbara McClintock. Is it more than it sounds like it is, or is it worth every penny to have that credential, and does she deserve every accolade?
She deserves every accolade, but not because she got the Nobel Prize. But I think that as a woman in science, to succeed was difficult at the time that she did it. She also became the president of the National Genetics Societies and so many things. So yes, she deserved it. But ironically, she herself didn't care much about it. The award came kind of late in life for her, for one thing. And earlier on, when she was doing her best work, she was kind of ignored and pushed to the side and thought of as eccentric. So by the time they gave her the award, she was already had become very famous on her own without any kind of support from the international community, really. And then I asked her about it one day when she used to train me one-on-one for several months in her lab. And I asked her one day, well, what was it like, to get the Nobel Prize? And she said, oh, I had to put on a costume. That's what she...
Schlep all the way to Europe.
Exactly. She didn't want to go there. She didn't want to put on a dress. She preferred menswear styles, and she didn't like wearing a dress and going over there. And she said, and then when I got back, I kept getting letters every day from strangers asking me for money. And she showed me this stack of letters every day, people asking her for money. Because if you get a Nobel Prize, they give you money. And she said it was hardly worth it. And she never brought it up again. So
wow.
I think training with her, though, was, really the honor of a lifetime. And I feel extremely lucky to have met her and trained with her. And I had a blast. I loved being around her. So, yes, it was wonderful. But the prize itself,
That's really weird that you get hit up for money. It's like people that win the lotto. You got to keep it secret. You can't keep this secret.
Yes, that's exactly what it's like.
All right, let's get to your book, When the Baby is Not Okay. Speaks for itself. Hopes and Genes by Jennifer Brown. Dr. Jennifer Brown, not medical Dr. Jennifer Brown. Question I ask is, why a book? I know the answer, but tell me why a book.
A book because, honestly, in the health community, it is memoirs that have driven advocacy. And I was having several mothers come up to me and say, what was it like for you? And wondering, because my older daughter had really gotten involved in PKU advocacy. And so people were asking me, well, what was it like when she was a baby? What was it like when you first found out? And I thought, with the background in genetics and having had Lily and Sophia and them growing up so well, maybe there's a story here for me to tell about newborn screening and finding out, because I heard from healthcare the baby was not okay. I knew they were going to be just fine, and they are. And I thought that could be a sort of a springboard or a spark for advocacy for some people.
That's the right answer. No wrong answer to that question. With regard to newborn screenings, has that improved over the years? Or if you could snap your fingers and fix anything about it, are there things to fix?
Yes. Newborn screening is, it's wonderful that we have it in the U.S., but It's only been taken up by about a third of all the births in the world. So globally, I think there is something there where we could screen in more places than we do. That's one thing. Another thing is sometimes the results come back timely, so quick enough to get a newborn who needs special care into that special care and protect their best health. Other times it comes late. And when it comes late, sometimes it comes too late. And in that sense, you've really mucked it up because now you know you have this condition and you know that it wasn't cared for and you know that you've, really lost out on that opportunity and have some suffering coming your way. And that's really sad. So I think that timeliness of screening depends on, where you live and how well your hospital is run and things like that.
Can you tell me more about the, I call it like the momvicates of the PKU communities? Are they feisty and fierce and fighting for everything every day? Or is it, what's the culture?
It really varies from family to family. Some families, usually it's the moms I've talked to. And
there are dadvocates too. I'm not being biased here, but momvicates really.
Yeah, it is usually mothers. There are some mothers who've really taken it upon themselves to sort of change the PKU world. Like Brenda Winiarski started Cook for Love. It's a recipe site, and it's wonderful. People who have PKU from all over the world go there to get recipes that work for their kids. And it's funny because she did that not liking cooking. She said, you may not love to cook, but you cook for love. And that's how she started her site.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, so she embraced it and she learned how to cook these wonderful things. And so there's an example of someone who was really, transformative for the community. And then there are other people who speak of it as really difficult and really traumatic and really time consuming and who have had to maybe leave their jobs and stay home in order to care for their children and whatnot. So it really, it varies a lot from family to family, depending on how much support they've had around them and whether they've had access to healthcare too.
So what are the most challenging needs that still exist in the PKU universe? See what I did there?
Yeah. For people who have a special diet that's medical, which many people do, not just people who have PKU, but people who have diabetes and many other conditions may have a special medical diet. The access to care is the number one issue for me that I see because many people cannot afford the medical treatment that they need. And sometimes someone will have to leave a job because the insurance isn't covering the medical foods. And these are a prescription. I mean, it's a food like a protein shake, but it's a prescribed formula or a prescribed shake, extremely costly. The cost of these things is more than a usual salary, even if you have a pretty good job in New York City. So they're so costly that if you can't get that covered, you're really up the creek. That is really tough. So I'd say access to care is number one. And number two, that's just as important, is that half the people who have PKU and grew up, they are not in care. So half of them, once they graduate from child to adult care, are not transitioned into PKU care as adults and live without care for their condition. So as you can imagine, then some of the symptoms that come along with this when it's not treated will be happening to them, and they're not getting the formula or the care that they need for the rest of their life. So this is a huge issue where many of us worry about newborn screening adding more and more conditions. The sad truth is that for one of the more common diagnosed ones, PKU, half the people that you screened as newborns are now not in care anyway because they can't have access to what they need. And the number one reason that they don't have access is lack of health insurance. So I think that's a big need right now, particularly because of the political changes we're encountering where there may be limitations to our access to care that if I thought it was a problem last year, I'm going to think it's more of a problem this year.
You're being very kind right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to not be too, pejorative, but access to care is the big one. And honestly, if you don't go in for care and a person has a PKU condition, they will be experiencing mental health issues, social issues, difficulty with retaining a job, difficulty with motor coordination, et cetera. There are so many things that pop up. So newborn screening is great, but it means afterwards we have a moral obligation as a society to put people into care and give them access to that care. We diagnose them, and now we're going to, just leave them to whatever their
Have
fate
you
may
met
be.
this country?
Yeah, so I think that's an ethical issue that we need to address as a society, and not as little isolated groups, but just overall,
So I noticed you don't just write books, you're a poet too. Where did that come from? Are you like a theater nerd at heart from college or something?
I like to read, and reading and writing has been really big for me since I was a little girl, because I was pretty much told to shut up all the time. Little girls were to be seen and not heard. So I wrote all the time, particularly when it comes to anything involving emotion. I was not really encouraged to express any emotions. And then in my adult life, I had depression for many, many years. So writing was kind of the way I expressed myself. So I wasn't really one to talk about my emotions at all, really, with anybody. I was a scientist. I was very busy. But when it came to the more emotional parts of life and those kind of tragic experiences that we have, from our families or our lives, I would express those in poetry and writing and in fiction. And most of my fiction is me working through trauma through fiction, so making up things that go better after some really horrible event or something. So people classify them as horror. And I was like, oh, this is horror? This is just my life. This is just
Right, what you know.
how I think. But then I started to think, well, why am I just writing fiction? I'm a scientist. I've written all these medical papers and grants and all that. I went, well, why don't I try nonfiction? So this is my first nonfiction book.
Wonderful. And again, right from the heart, write what you know. I want to wrap with, what is can you choose of your favorite research kids, quote unquote, your most nerdiest success story in research?
My nerdiest success story. Yes, I have a nerdy success story that has a horror element.
Go for it.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was a postdoc for 7 years. That's a really long time after I got my degree. The postdoc is the next job that's in research. And then the next year I got a faculty position because I had discovered something and written a patent on it for how to make a mouse model for testing cancer drugs, because I wanted to try and test them in the mouse first instead of on people in clinical trials. My mom had a bad reaction to a clinical trial and passed away, and it hurt me deeply. So I worked up this mouse model, was getting the patent. And then the nerdy thing that happened that was horrific is the company supporting me, a biochemical company, and the university where I got in a patent dispute. So they were fighting, and they transferred the entire project to Israel away from the United States, which ended the funding that supported my faculty position. So after 7 years as a postdoc, ultra nerdy, never making very much money at all, which was just, really hard with 2 kids, I lost my job. So I lost my job because of the funding, because of the patent dispute over something I'd invented. And I was like, well, look at that. You can do really well, come up with something completely new, get a patent, and lose your job.
God. Yeah, that's a horror story.
Yeah, and then I transferred into more medical education and medical communications, writing, things like that, So, I did fine, but the dream sort of the nerd of being the researcher, and the faculty and all that went right down the toilet at that point.
Well, I know a Nobel laureate right now, so we can always call her up. All right. So I always wrap the show with a ChatGPT, like Gen X boomer moment. And I feed it, that sounds like Feed Me Seymour from Little Shop Hours. I feed it information about you, and I speak to it about how I feel about you and what I want the show to be about. And I ask it one question. I ask it, if your life were a Netflix series, who would your pop culture soulmates be? So number 1, you're Gertie from E.T., Drew Barrymore's character. Because you're fierce, funny, 5 steps ahead. You see truth, you scream out loud, and you make the adults catch up. I can't read this. That's you with jeans, justice, and a bottle in one hand, PubMed in the other.
Perfect.
You are Harry the Spy, which I kind of knew it was going to say this, but notebook out, antenna up, Harry documented chaos so people wouldn't pretend they didn't see it. You do the same thing, just with peer-reviewed receipts and poetry.
True.
And you are finally Dr. Ellie Arroway from the movie Contact, the Carl Sagan movie. Yeah. You heard static, found meaning, and ignored by men. Case in point. Saved by science. Your vibe is pure data over drama, rage under control, faith in facts, and ready to burn it all down at a moment's notice.
Absolutely.
You get to keep this.
I love it.
It's your souvenir.
Thank you. And I like what you said about fire. And I just have to say, it takes a spark to start a fire. And when we look at healthcare today, we need a fire. And I thank you for all you're doing. I just love your podcast.
Thank you so much. Dr. Jennifer Brown, author of When the Baby Is Not Okay, hyper glamorous research nerd to the stars, inventor of something that got stolen from her, and mother to 2 amazing daughters. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Out of Patience with Matthew Zachary is a production of Matthew Zachary Worldwide. The executive producer is Matthew Zachary. It is mixed and edited by Kyle Moore. If you like the show, ratings and reviews are always welcome wherever you get your podcasts. If you have guest suggestions or would like to learn more about sponsorship opportunities, email podcast@matthewzachary.com. For more information about Matthew Zachary and Matthew Zachary Worldwide, visit matthewzachary.com.